You think you know what your problem is. You think the issue is discipline. You think if you just woke up earlier, worked harder, stayed more consistent, pushed through the resistance a little longer, everything would finally click. You have convinced yourself that the gap between where you are and where you want to be is a willpower gap, a motivation gap, a character gap. And that belief, that very specific belief, is the reason you are still stuck. Not because you are weak, not because you are broken, but because you have been diagnosing the wrong disease your entire life. What you are about to hear is going to contradict almost everything you were taught about how human beings grow, struggle, succeed, and collapse. And the more it contradicts what you believe, the more carefully you should listen, because the mind tends to reject most aggressively the ideas it needs most urgently. Before we go any further, if this kind of content speaks to something in you, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This type of reflection is rare, and your support is what allows it to keep reaching people who genuinely need it. Now let us go deep. There is a stage of life, a specific, identifiable, psychological stage that the vast majority of human beings enter and never fully leave. Not because they are not smart enough to escape it, not because they did not try hard enough, but because no one ever told them the stage existed. No one ever named it. And a trap you cannot name is a trap you cannot see. Abraham Maslow spent decades trying to understand why some human beings flourished, and others, even with every apparent advantage, quietly crumbled. He was not studying failure, he was studying something far more disturbing. He was studying people who had done everything right and still felt completely hollow inside. People who achieved the things they were supposed to achieve, who followed the path they were supposed to follow, and arrived at the destination only to find that the destination felt like nothing. That was the mystery that consumed him. And what he found was not a psychological disorder. It was not a clinical diagnosis. It was something so fundamental, so structural, so built into the architecture of human motivation that once you see it, you cannot unsee it, and you will begin to see it everywhere, in the people around you, in the culture you were raised in the choices you have made without realizing you were making them. You will see it in your own life, in the specific moments when you felt the most lost, the most numb, the most disconnected from everything that was supposed to matter. That is where we are going today. Let us start with the model you were given. You were raised inside a very specific story about how human life works. The story goes something like this. You are born with potential. That potential needs to be developed. Development happens through effort. Effort produces results. Results produce satisfaction. Satisfaction produces happiness. Happiness, therefore, is earned. It is the reward at the end of the chain. And if you are not happy, if you are not satisfied, if you are not fulfilled, the diagnosis is simple. You did not work hard enough. You did not want it badly enough. You gave up too early. You were not disciplined enough. The solution is always the same: more effort, more consistency, more willpower. Push harder. Go further. Do not stop. That is the model. That is the story that was handed to you. And it sounds reasonable. It sounds like wisdom. It sounds like the kind of thing that should be printed on motivational posters and carved into stone. But here is what the model cannot explain. It cannot explain why people who have worked harder than almost anyone they know still feel completely empty at the end of the day. It cannot explain why someone can hit every professional goal they set for themselves and still lie awake at 3 in the morning with a feeling of quiet dread that they cannot name. It cannot explain why a person can have the relationship, the career, the stability, the respect of their peers, and still feel like they are performing a version of their own life rather than living it. The model says, those people should be fine. The model says effort produces satisfaction, but those people put in the effort, and they are not fine. So either those people are broken, or the model is wrong. And here is what you need to sit with for a moment. We have been choosing to believe the people are broken, because that is easier. If the people are broken, the system stays intact. If the people are broken, the answer is still more effort, more therapy, more optimization. If the people are broken, nothing about the fundamental story needs to change. But Maslow chose differently. He looked at those people, the ones who had done everything right, and still felt the hollowness, and he asked a different question. He did not ask what is wrong with them. He asked what is the structure of human need, and are they trying to fill the wrong need? That question changed everything. Observe your own history for a moment. Not the version you tell at dinner parties, Not the clean narrative where everything makes sense in retrospect. The real history, the internal one, the one made of feelings and silences and moments that never quite resolved the way you expected them to. Go back to a time when you were working towards something, a goal, a milestone, something you genuinely believed would change the quality of your life when you reached it. You can feel the texture of that period, the anticipation, the effort, the sense that you were building towards something real, something that would finally make the present moment feel justified. And then you got there, or close enough to there. Close enough that the thing you had been chasing became real, became present, became yours. And notice what happened next. Not the first day. The first day often feels fine, sometimes even good. But a week later, a month later, notice the specific feeling of realizing that the thing you got did not do what you needed it to do. The relief was temporary. The satisfaction had an expiration date. The horizon just moved further away, and you probably told yourself that the next thing would be different, that you just needed to go one level higher, one accomplishment further, one more relationship, one more degree, one more promotion, one more version of yourself. And then it would feel like enough, but it did not feel like enough the last time. And it has not felt like enough this time either. And somewhere underneath the strategy and the ambition and the plan, there is a voice that occasionally asks a question you do not know how to answer. It asks whether you are running towards something or away from something. And you keep moving so you do not have to sit with the answer. That is not weakness. That is not failure. That is what happens when a human being is trying to satisfy a need at the wrong level. And Maslow, more than any other thinker of the 20th century, understood exactly why that happens. Here is the inversion. Here is the thing that is going to feel wrong before it feels right. You have been told that you lack motivation. You have been told that the problem is insufficient drive, insufficient passion, insufficient commitment to your own growth. That if you just wanted it more, if you just found your purpose, if you just got clear on your why, the energy would come, the clarity would come, the forward movement would finally feel natural instead of forced. That is the diagnosis everyone gives you. That is the solution everyone sells you. But it is backwards, completely, structurally, fundamentally backwards. It is not a lack of motivation that keeps you stuck. It is that your deepest needs are not being met. And when your deepest needs are not being met, your brain physically cannot generate the kind of motivation that everyone keeps telling you to find. Read that again slowly. Motivation is not the fuel. Motivation is the output. Motivation is what happens when certain conditions are met inside a human being. And if those conditions are not met, no amount of mindset work, no amount of discipline strategies, no amount of goal-setting frameworks will produce lasting, genuine, sustainable motivation. Because you cannot manufacture the output by ignoring the input. You have been trying to start a fire by lighting the smoke. The smoke is real, the absence of motivation is real. But the smoke is not the problem. The smoke is the symptom. The fire is underneath it. And the fire is a set of unmet human needs so fundamental that without them, the entire architecture of a meaningful life cannot stand. Maslow did not just give us a pyramid with categories. He gave us a map of what happens to a human being when they try to skip levels. And what happens is not that they fail to achieve. What happens is far more insidious than that. What happens is that they achieve, and it means nothing to them. And that experience, the experience of achieving something and feeling nothing, is one of the most psychologically destabilizing things a human being can go through, because it destroys the only story that was keeping you going. Let us talk about the pyramid, but not the way your high school psychology teacher talked about it. Maslow observed something that seems obvious once you hear it, but that almost no one actually lives by. He observed that human beings have needs that exist in a hierarchy, not a moral hierarchy, not a hierarchy of worth or value, a hierarchy of urgency. A structural order in which certain needs, when unmet, dominate the entire psychological system. When those foundational needs are unmet, the higher needs do not disappear. They become inaccessible, not because you are not smart enough to pursue them, but because the brain, in its evolutionary wisdom, will not allow the system to focus on meaning and growth and purpose while the foundations are unstable. Think about it in physical terms first, because the physical version is easy to understand. Imagine you are standing on a floor that is crumbling beneath your feet. Pieces of it are giving way. The structure under you is unstable. Can you focus on painting the ceiling in that moment? Can you pour your energy into decorating the walls? Can you sit down and read a book about architecture? Of course not. Every cell in your body is focused on the floor, on not falling, on stabilizing the ground beneath you. That is what the brain does when foundational needs are unmet. It focuses everything on the floor, and it does not care that you have a vision board on the wall. It does not care that you have a 5-year plan. It does not care that your life coach told you to think bigger. It will not let you think about the ceiling while the floor is coming apart. Now here is where it gets painful, because this is where most people's lives actually live. The foundational needs Maslow identified were not complicated. Safety, belonging, stability, the sense that the world is not going to collapse on you without warning. The experience of being connected to other people in a way that is real and not performative. The feeling that your existence is not contingent on your performance, that you can be still for a moment without losing everything. And what the modern world has done, systematically, methodically, often without anyone intending it, is create conditions in which those foundational needs are chronically, quietly, invisibly unmet. Not dramatically unmet, not obviously unmet, just enough to keep the floor unstable, just enough to keep the brain focused downward instead of upward, just enough to keep an entire generation of capable, intelligent, hardworking human beings perpetually unable to access the parts of themselves that could actually generate the life they keep imagining. And then the culture turns around and says, "You just need more discipline," and you believe it. Because the alternative, the idea that the system itself is producing this, the idea that your suffering is not a personal failure, but a structural outcome, that alternative feels too large. It feels like surrendering. It feels like an excuse. But it is not an excuse, it is a diagnosis. And the difference between an excuse and a diagnosis is everything. An excuse removes responsibility. A diagnosis restores it, because once you know what is actually wrong, you can actually fix it. If this is landing somewhere real for you, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from. Sometimes just knowing that other people are sitting with the same questions, in different cities, in different languages, in different versions of the same life, changes something. You do not have to say much, just be here. Now let us go one level deeper, because this is not just a personal story. What Maslow identified as a psychological principle, the collapse that happens when human beings try to build meaning on an unstable foundation, has become the defining feature of modern life. Not for one person, not for one generation, for an entire civilization. Look at the structure of the world that was built in the last several decades. It was built on the premise that material security produces psychological security. That if you give people enough money, enough comfort, enough distraction, enough convenience, the foundational needs would be met automatically. The assumption was that safety and belonging would take care of themselves once the economic infrastructure was sophisticated enough. But it did not work that way, because material security and psychological security are not the same thing. You can have a stable income and still feel profoundly unsafe. You can have a full schedule and still feel profoundly alone. You can have every comfort that previous generations would have considered miraculous and still lie awake at night with the specific, inexplicable sensation that something essential is missing, something you cannot buy, something you cannot achieve, something that no productivity system and no self-optimization program can manufacture. And here is what is particularly devastating about this moment in history. The people who feel this, the millions and millions of people who feel the hollowness behind their full calendars and their curated lives, they are being told that the solution is more of what already is not working. More hustle, more goals, more content, more stimulation, more self-improvement, more optimization of the self, as if the self were a machine with the wrong settings rather than a human being with the wrong foundations. Maslow would look at the modern world, and he would not be surprised. He would say that what you are seeing is exactly what happens when a civilization scales the top of the pyramid before stabilizing the bottom. He would say you have produced a world that is extraordinarily good at giving people access to the highest levels of stimulation, information, ambition, and aesthetic experience, while simultaneously undermining the quiet, unsexy, unglamorous foundational conditions that make those higher experiences meaningful. You can reach the top of the pyramid, but if the bottom is not solid, standing at the top does not feel like height, it feels like vertigo. Here is what your intuition will tell you at this point. Your intuition will tell you that this is too simple, that real life is more complicated, that you cannot reduce the complexity of human suffering to a pyramid diagram from a mid-century psychologist. Your intuition will say that your problems are more specific, more personal, more nuanced than any framework can capture. And in one sense, your intuition is right. Your story is specific. Your pain is specific. The exact texture of what you carry is yours and no one else's. But here is what your intuition will not tell you, because intuition does not operate at the structural level. Intuition operates at the level of experience, and experience, however vivid, however real, however deeply felt, is not always a reliable map of cause. You feel like your problem is motivation, but the cause is unmet foundational need. You feel like your problem is the wrong career or the wrong relationship or the wrong city, but the cause is trying to extract meaning from circumstances that cannot provide it because the underlying architecture is unstable. You feel like your problem is unique to you, a personal flaw, a specific deficiency, a wound that is yours alone. But the cause is universal. It is the human condition pressed against a world that does not understand it. Maslow was not the first person to notice this. Philosophers noticed it centuries before he named it. Artists have been pointing at it for as long as there has been art. The specific feeling of reaching for something and finding that your hands pass through it. The specific longing for a depth of experience that the surface of life keeps promising and never delivering. That has been the subject of the most important works of human expression in every era. What Maslow did was name the mechanism. He identified the exact structural reason why that longing exists, what it is pointing at, and what it needs in order to finally resolve. And the answer he arrived at was not the answer anyone wanted, because the answer was not a technique. The answer was not a strategy. The answer was not something you could optimize or schedule or track on a spreadsheet. The answer was presence, genuine, unmediated, structurally grounded presence to your own life at the level that your system actually needs, not the level you want to be at, not the level that looks impressive, not the level that your ambition has decided is appropriate for someone your age with your potential, the level your nervous system is actually operating from. Let us talk about what the collapse actually looks like, because it is important to name it precisely, not dramatically, precisely. The collapse does not usually look like falling apart. That would almost be easier. If you fell apart visibly, dramatically, in a way that everyone could see, then the need for something to change would be undeniable. You would have no choice but to stop and address the foundation. But that is not how it usually goes. What usually happens is quieter, more socially acceptable, more invisible. What usually happens is that you continue to function, you continue to show up. You continue to go through the motions of a productive, responsible, engaged adult life, and the people around you see someone who is managing fine, because you are managing fine, on the outside. But on the inside, something has quietly dimmed. The things that used to matter started mattering a little less without you noticing exactly when that happened. The goals that used to feel urgent now feel like obligations you are meeting because you already set them in motion, not because they connect to anything real inside you. The relationships that should feel like home feel like performances you have gotten very good at, and you are tired. Not the tired that sleep fixes, the tired that is still there on the first morning of a vacation, the tired that does not respond to rest, the tired that is really something else entirely, that is really the specific exhaustion of a human being who has been living above their actual needs for a very long time. Maslow called this state by a number of names at different points in his career. In his later work, he described it as the experience of striving without being, the difference between pursuing goals and actually inhabiting your own life. And he noticed that most people in modern societies had become extraordinarily good at the first thing and had almost entirely lost access to the second, striving without being. Say that to yourself for a moment, because you know exactly what that feels like. You have felt it, the forward motion that has no center, the doing that is untethered from any genuine sense of self, the productivity that is both genuine and hollow at the same time. You are achieving things, you are genuinely achieving things, but something essential is absent from the experience, and you keep moving because if you stop, if you let yourself fully arrive in the present moment, you are not sure what you will find there. That is the stage. That is the specific, named, identifiable stage that Maslow was pointing at, and almost no one survives it in the sense that almost no one passes through it consciously. Most people spend years, sometimes decades, in that stage, believing it is a temporary condition they will resolve once the next goal is reached. Most people exit it not through insight, but through exhaustion. Through hitting a wall they could no longer get up from. Through a loss or a crisis or a rupture that finally made the invisible structural problem impossible to ignore. A small number of people exit it differently. A small number of people exit it by doing what you are doing right now, by sitting with the question long enough to let the diagnosis land, by being willing to feel the discomfort of having the wrong model replaced by a more accurate one. Those are the ones Maslow was most interested in. He called them self-actualizing people. And the name is misleading because it sounds like the kind of buzzword that shows up on motivational content and means nothing. But what Maslow meant by it was specific. He meant people who had genuinely, structurally, from the ground up, met their foundational needs and were therefore capable of operating from something higher than survival. People whose sense of safety did not come from external conditions, but from an internal architecture that had been honestly and carefully built. People who were not performing stability. People who had actually constructed it. And here is what he found about those people that almost no one talks about. They were not the most ambitious. They were not the most driven. They were not the ones who had optimized their mornings and their mindsets and their goals. They were the ones who had stopped running, not stopped growing, not stopped caring, not stopped engaging with the world, but stopped running, stopped moving so fast that they could not feel the ground beneath their feet, stopped striving so relentlessly that they had no access to the present moment they were striving within. They had done the harder thing. They had turned around and looked at the foundation. They had assessed honestly, sometimes painfully, where the floor was crumbling and where it was solid. And they had attended to the crumbling parts before trying to build higher. They had done what every architect knows must be done, and what almost no motivational culture ever acknowledges. They had built from the ground up. So what does that actually mean for you? Not in abstract terms, not in theoretical terms, but in the specific, lived, practical terms of the life you are actually living. It means that the first question to ask is not where you want to go. The first question to ask is where you actually are, not where your resume says you are, not where your social media says you are, not where your goals and ambitions and 5-year plan says you are, where you actually are, in your body, in your nervous system, in the quality of your daily experience, in the texture of your relationships, in the way it feels to be alive in your own life on an ordinary Tuesday. Because the honest answer to that question is the only starting point from which anything real can be built. If you are operating from a place of chronic low-grade anxiety, the work is not to set bigger goals. The work is to address the anxiety at its root, which is almost always an unmet need for safety and stability that no amount of achievement will fill. If you are operating from a place of chronic loneliness, even a subtle loneliness, even a loneliness that is mostly invisible because your life is full of people, the work is not to find your purpose. The work is to build genuine connection, real, mutual, honest connection that does not depend on your performance or your productivity. If you are operating from a place of chronic, low self-regard, from a deep, quiet belief that your worth is conditional, that you are only as valuable as your last accomplishment, the work is not to accomplish more. The work is to examine where that belief came from and whether it is true. None of that is glamorous. None of that makes for a good highlight reel. None of that is what the self-help industry is built to sell you. But all of it is what Maslow spent his career pointing toward. The unsexy foundation, the unglamorous ground floor, the work that happens below the surface, in the parts of your life that no one else can see, in the conversations you have not had, in the needs you have not acknowledged, in the grief you have not processed, in the rest you have not taken, in the honesty you have not allowed yourself. That is the work, and it is the only work that actually changes anything at the structural level.